So hello again, Heghoulian. Heghoulian. Harry Heghoulian. All you.
Right, Heghoulian. Hello, hello, Dave. Good to speak to you again.
Yeah. So after getting a pretty good reception over our last talk, following our last talk, I thought he'd talk again. Yeah. So the idea today is to discuss movies and the author J.G. Ballard, who was an inspiration for quite a few films.
Right.
So I actually have in mind, I'm going to use the movie High Rise, which is a film adapted from one of his novels that doesn't seem to have been too popular. It doesn't have a lot of widespread recognition. It came out in 2015. It stars who's that guy? Tom Middleton.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Tom Hiddleston. Hiddleston.
Hiddleston. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had a feeling it was something slightly different. Hiddleston. Yep.
Yeah.
High
And
Rise.
it's based on the 1975 novel of the same name by a British writer, J.G. Ballard, author of Crash, as well as an inspiration, I think, for I was about to say some of Cronenberg's films, but I actually have in mind just Crash by Cronenberg.
Right.
Okay.
I think Ballard was a bit of inspiration for Cronenberg, and I think Cronenberg has acknowledged that. You know, the kind of body horror, things like Videodrome.
Yes,
I
Videodrome,
think that there's a clearly Ballardian, really. Yeah.
Right. Cronenberg actually had a movie in the 70s where a kind of new high-rise building figured prominently in it. I can't remember the name of it.
I think that's Shivers, isn't it?
Shivers.
Yeah, this is kind of odd because it came out in 75, the same year as High Rise. So there was something in the air, definitely. But Shivers, I like Shivers. Yeah, it's really interesting.
The movie Shivers came out at the same time as the novel High Rise.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, just an odd coincidence, really. But yeah, yeah.
Oh well, the movie Shivers, I think it takes place in Montreal or Toronto, and so it looks vaguely European, especially Montreal. So like it might. There's a kind of I don't know, Le Corbusier style architectural modernism thing that's evident in Eastern Canada, especially in Quebec, that really does remind one of Europe.
Yeah, that he makes full use of that in the film for sure. If I can maybe talk about it for those people who haven't seen it. So Shivers is set in a high-rise block like this, and as I remember, it opens with a kind of promotional film.
Yeah,
telling any prospective resident how wonderful life is in this high-rise. And anyway, it turns out, of course, it's not so wonderful because there is I remember there's some kind of crazy, is he a doctor or a scientist? And he comes across some kind of parasite, I remember. Parasite, which sort of takes up residence in people's bodies. It's quite I don't know, the size of your fist or something like this. Kind of disgusting slug-like parasite. But the way it operates, this parasite, is it causes people to kind of get extremely horny, and then
okay,
yeah,
that's weird. Yeah, if they knew it was a parasite, then it'd be the most anti-horny thing. But I suppose it's kind of operating unbeknownst to them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so they get horny, and with the consequences of that is that the parasite spreads, and they become sort of deranged with this parasite, sexually deranged.
Oh,
and and then this parasite infects more and more of the inhabitants of the building. So in some ways it is a bit like High Rise, in that High Rise, the novel, describes a kind of breakdown of civilized existence, really.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the novel. I'm too much of a Philistine really to have read many of these books, but I've often seen the movie that's adapted from it. And in High Rise, there's nothing like a parasite going around, but they do become sort of um, let's see, they're a bit cut off from the rest of society because I think the building is sort of touting one of its benefits is you never need to leave, right? There's like
That's right. Yeah,
like
there's
ground
every kind of amenity there. Hmm.
above it where you can do all your shopping. So they
Hmm.
become a bit there's a bit of an island fever thing going on there, and they start to sort of turn against each other, but also fuck each other.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yes.
there's a bit of an overlap there. There's something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really destructive and ugly kind of sexual scene, though, which in a way seems like an indictment of the disco era, like a hedonism taken too far kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, Ballard. I think when Ballard was had this, when he was writing this book, he was thinking about, he'd been dealing with in this book high-rise apartment blocks and asking really what effect they have on the people who use them. Um, so it's like psychological effects mostly, and Ballard suggests really in this book that the people find, first of all, the fact that they are so sort of crowded together leads to this kind of antagonism, but
Yeah,
when they start to drift into this kind of anarchy, that they embrace it. There's I think there's a scene with Lang, who's the protagonist, and as I recall, he's an architect, and he does consider leaving the high rise for, I think, to go to work as normal, but he decides not to. That he'd rather stay. So really, everyone, yeah.
it's funny that's what's a little interesting. I mean, it's like a posh new high rise, and so you'd think only pretty well compensated professionals, people who make good a deal of money, would be living there, and yet
Right.
they don't leave.
No,
People like that
they
are
don't leave.
they
No.
need to leave. It actually makes more sense for a kind of a public housing, low income people to never leave.
Right,
They're not
right.
they're,
Well,
they
they
have
do have some kind of stratification in the
yeah.
building. Different levels of society. That's kind of part of the conceit, I suppose, of the
Oh, is
novel.
that right?
Yeah, yeah. That they have
Like
kind of class system in the high rise. And I suppose it was intended as a slightly futuristic novel. The Ballard wasn't describing any existing arrangement really.
well,
Um,
I believe High Rise actually was meant to take place in the 70s.
yeah, well, it's kind of it has got that sort of 70s feel, obviously, but I think Ballard was kind of setting it, as he would say, 5 minutes in the future, kind of.
Oh, you know what?
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm reading over the admittedly reading over the Wikipedia page. It says the film is set in the 1970s.
Right.
The
Yeah.
book, I
Yeah.
suppose, was not set in that time, or not necessarily. Okay. Yeah, it's funny though. With all of these professionals not leaving the building, in a way, it actually fits better for the work from home era. You could almost
That's right.
redo it, set in a kind of pandemic environment where they're not leaving because they're working from home. They're afraid of catching the virus, and so they just end up, being in each other's faces so much it drives each other nuts, right?
Yes. Okay. I think Peter's joined us.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yes. Hello.
Hey, folks.
Hey,
Can you guys hear me, by the way?
yeah.
I can.
Yeah, that's great to meet you. I listened to some of your earlier chat that happened a couple of weeks ago, and it's really enjoyable. So happy to be joining you guys.
Cool.
Me
Thanks.
too. Great.
We've been talking about J.G. Ballard inspired films. Shivers, the 1975 film, High Rise, which is a 2015 film. Shivers is not exactly. I don't think Shivers is based on J.G. Ballard, but it kind of overlaps with J.G. Ballard style novel.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they just have a bit of an affinity. Cronenberg and Ballard had many of the same obsessions or preoccupations. So that's how that happens to be rather sort of I don't know, resonant really. I suppose it sort of resonate together, those Shivers and High Rise.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about High Rise having a kind of a class system built into the many floors of its residents, right? I'm assuming the lower floors are more low class, or
That's it, as I remember. I mean, it's a while since I read the novel, but I think that's correct. Yeah, it is divided by floors.
it's a little bit like Snowpiercer, if you've seen that movie. And now it,
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. It is. Yeah.
yeah,
I just want to call out one thing that I think is interesting, having just jumped into this in the middle, obviously. I've always thought that it's interesting that so many more films are based on Philip K. Dick novels rather than J.G. Ballard. It seems like Ballard created so many worlds that could also be, made into great films. Even like a lot of his short stories are super cinematographic or whatever. But for some reason, Philip K. Dick has captured the imagination of Hollywood so much more, which I think that's just kind of interesting. And I'm not sure if that is because of like the postmodern elements of Ballard that maybe Hollywood just doesn't know what to do with them.
yeah.
But anyway, throwing that out there, I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I think
Ballard. I was just quickly that I think Ballard might be. This is based on a documentary, a British documentary I saw of his from the early 2000s. He seemed to have a thing for depicting kind of mid 20th century Britain suburbia, specifically. That might constrain potential directors and producers as far as what they can do with the material.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
yes, and Ballard before Cronenberg made Crash. I mean, quite a bit before. I think in the early '80s, in one interview, Ballard said he was kind of glad that Crash hadn't been made into a film, even though there was some interest in the '70s in doing that, because he thought that his own imagination, his own vision for Crash would be kind of deformed by the film, that it would take over. So that might be part of the reason why Ballard's novels, short stories, haven't been made into so many films. If there is some sort of criteria maybe from the other, maybe Ballard's estate perhaps might have
Yeah,
some.
that actually is pretty common with a lot of those authors, I believe. I mean, I just recently read Running Wild by Ballard. I'm not sure if you guys have read that, but it could be it seems like something that like Amazon or Netflix would release as a film. Have you guys read that book by any chance?
I haven't read it, but I know the premise of it. Yeah.
Yeah, great premise. These kids just, murder everyone, all their parents when they live in this gated community. And it has so many just like really fantastic analogies to, modern life that could be so interesting. And it's, just kind of begging to be made into a film. But I do wonder if, maybe his estate is opposed to that for some reason. Or maybe, just like for some reason, like the right director hasn't come across that book yet.
Could be. I mean, I think it's '88 that Running Wild. Yeah.
It is.
And
Yeah, I just looked it up.
Yeah,
yeah,
pretty dark.
Dark stuff. Yeah, that was kind of Ballard's sort of the beginning of Ballard's kind of obsession with the gated communities, and the psychology of those places. But not only the psychology, but I think the politics, because he became more interested in the social side in his later years of the subjects that he covered. And he said, for example, that the gated community, big disadvantage really is that you have these middle class professionals kind of isolating themselves from the rest of society inside these gated communities, and then that you don't have that mix anymore, which you used to have of the social classes, people meeting each other from different walks of life. And he thought that would be quite damaging to the social fabric of Western societies if that was going to continue.
Yeah, the suburbia and the idea of gated communities and kind of middle class, upper middle class professionals isolating themselves, that came through in another movie based, I believe, off of Ballard. It only came out the last year or two, called Vivarium. It stars
Right.
Eisenberg and what's there's a woman in that as well. She's a British actress. She has a kind of a
Imogen Poots or something.
Imogene Poot. Yeah, good one.
Imogen.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting to me that suburbia is such an American concept. What is Europe's relationship to suburbia? I genuinely have no idea. Like, are they as, kind of like unhappily stuck with it as America is, or are they kind of like leaning into it more?
um, well, I think Ballard was a bit maybe ambivalent about suburbia, himself. But he said, for example, he lived in Shepperton, in a suburb of Shepperton, and he said that this was kind of lunar and abstract, this this place. So it was quite an inspiration for him. But he does say occasionally, he does kind of talk about suburbia in kind of negative terms. He talks about, for example, the suburbanization of the soul, which is a kind of another version of his death of the soul, which he sometimes spoke about. So he's, as I say, like many things, about Ballard, is ambivalent about it. But I think Europe generally, when it comes to suburbia, I think most people recognize that there are some kind of limitations and problems with suburbia, but they're not prepared really to go back to, kind of living in crowded conditions, inner city conditions. They'd rather put up with suburbia and sort of suburban isolation, and they just accepted that, I think.
One thing that's interesting to me along those lines is that whenever you see, uh, illustrations of a futuristic city, it never has mixed use buildings. It seems like to me, it still is trying to do the thing. This is just like a generalization, but whenever you look at any sort of a futuristic image of a city, it's always big buildings downtown with lots of like greenery, and then the idea that like people still live
Right.
kind of separate from the downtown area. And I mean, I really kind of wonder if that is just a lack of imagination of people who work in like the sci-fi world, that they haven't inspired, architects to envision more of like walkable, urban environments with mixed use buildings. I've been like really curious about that recently, as I forget what, there's this new one, that's the utopian city. I forget what it's called, but they're trying to build it, I think, in like Arizona or something like this. And it's again like they released their futuristic version of a city, and it still does not look like it's walkable mixed use buildings. And I'm wondering, if anyone still has that vision left aside from, just maybe some urban planners in San Francisco or something. It's just hard to say.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like that these visions are usually very utopian, and they don't really have much resemblance. They don't bear much resemblance to reality. Um, and that's the long tradition, right? Of Le Corbusier, the kind of vision of a city which is, I think it would be impossible to live in, really. I see.
Interesting they did that in Arizona. When I think of something being constructed in Arizona as some sort of utopia, I think of a biodome or something.
Mhm.
Oh, totally. Yeah, apparently they haven't picked out a location yet, but they're trying to raise like $5 billion. And I mean, I recently talked to an urban planner, and about this project, and he was telling me that in general, you just simply can't build a successful city from scratch to have it planned out like this. Like they tried it with Brasilia in Brazil, and it's just like the worst city of all time. He says, and
Oh yeah,
I think that I probably agree with this, that
I
like
believe
cities
that
do
was
have to
70s as well.
rise up organically.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think the a city is a living organism, really. So if you're trying to just start it from scratch, you're probably you can't really replace that process.
And
Which
that's maybe the issue with Suburbia, why it does kind of like have a soul suckedness aspect to it, because it is always inherently, it's very planned rather than organically put together.
I've wondered about that. You see a lot of neighborhoods, the kind of neighborhoods that somewhat more sophisticated, I don't know, hipstery young professionals would prefer to live in, and those were once suburbs. They were once pretty cookie cutter, and over time, modifications to people's homes, just overgrowth, trees and whatnot, moss. I don't know. It starts to take on a somewhat less cookie cutter and more organic looking, more customized, natural, spontaneous look. So a lot of times what people are sort of pining for is just a suburbia that is sufficiently old.
Right.
I wonder about this. Like, I'm kind of waiting for a group of artists to just snap up some rundown suburb of, like, Missouri, or just some random place where it's like housing is cheap, and like poor artists just go in and buy a bunch of houses and like live together communally. I'm waiting for that to happen and to be like a story. I haven't seen that yet, but some friends and I have talked about, if we ever just like have extra cash, just like buy a suburb. When they're just like giving away houses as they are in some parts, like in Mississippi, you can buy a house for like $6,000. It'd be interesting to see like a group of artists like really own that concept.
Yeah, I mean, actually, there's a film I could mention about this topic, which is from 2006. It's called Radiant City, obviously from the Le Corbusier saying. And it was it was a documentary. It's by two Canadians, Gary Burns and Jim Brown, and it's very good, actually. It's really interesting. It goes into the life of a suburban family in Canada, and it's also pretty funny in some ways, in terms of what they get up to, sort of their neuroses, especially the wife's kind of hang-ups about showing the film crew her home, and also other families that they speak to about living in this suburb, sort of having to take public transport and meeting various people, a real estate agent and so on. And I remember around about the time it was released, there were some comments about that it did have a bit of a Ballardian aesthetic, this film, the way it
looking
kind
at
of
it,
has,
I'm looking at a description of it now, and it does look like it took place in Quebec. This Radiant City.
Right.
Yeah. So again, Quebec, that part of Canada gives off such a strong European vibe.
Yes. Yeah, it has a bit of that sort of Ballardian eye, maybe, for the landscape, and I definitely recommend this film, this Radiant City, if you can find it. It's excellent. Yeah.
It's interesting. We're talking about high rise, and I recall a period in the late '80s and early '90s where there was this kind of surveillance techno-grid chic, where the idea of being spied on, combined with eroticism, was sort of in vogue. There's the movie Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
Right.
There's a movie called Sliver. Didn't get very good reviews, but it has one of the Baldwin brothers and Sharon Stone. And it's about a woman who lives in a high-rise that was meant to be kind of like, your one-stop shop, ultimate living destination. But it turns out there's like someone at the helm or a group of people who are spying on all the residents. So that's a kind of an
That rings a bell, actually. That's I think I have seen it.
Already an aspect to that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that was an interesting, almost like not quite enough to be kind of a palpable theme in films, but for a little while there was something going on with that. Yeah, the notion of being spied upon as vaguely erotic and sexy, like something even desirable about it. And it's funny how that has not aged well at all in the social media. Now it's just seeming ultimately creepy, the ultimate form of creepage. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's kind of been sort of banalized. It's a topic I talked about before, that many things which seemed like, they would be exciting and kind of erotic, as you said, have turned out to be kind of banal, and there's nothing really appealing about them.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the surveillance, there's that other film, The Lives of Others, which is about the Stasi. And that did make the sort of spying and surveillance kind of glamorous, but also
it did,
sort of dark and creepy, obviously at the same time. But yeah, I think in the 90s, I mean, Britain became the the country with, I think, the highest density of closed circuit television cameras in the world, right?
Yeah, I recall
Uh,
that talking point. And it was sort of competing with Northern Europe, like Sweden or something, for a while there, but I think it eclipsed even
I think it
Scandinavia.
edged. Yeah, we really have a passion for these things in Britain. Yeah. There's another film I could mention actually. It might be even be from the same year, I think 2006, which is Red Road. Red Road. And
Red.
this was, yeah, Red Road. This was a debut film of a woman director who went on to some acclaim actually. Um, but anyway, the film is Scottish. It's set in I think in Glasgow, and Red Road refers to the Red Road estates, which were high-rise estates actually, coincidentally. They were very, very tall, sort of social housing built in the, I don't know, maybe the 70s, and a kind of notorious estate. It's since been demolished. Notorious estate for crime. And the protagonist of this in this film is a woman who works in the CCTV kind of monitoring sort of bunker or whatever you want to call it, and she's kind of watching these goings on in Red Road and other parts of Glasgow, and anyway, she gets into it. She kind of spots somebody on this camera who she knows from the past. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but she knows this man from her past, and she has a bit of a bone to pick with him. So she starts using her her position. She starts abusing her position, you might say, with this ability to put him under surveillance. So really interesting, powerful film. Kind of low key, subtle.
I see that it gets good reviews, 88% on RT. That's
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's got a great kind of aesthetic. It felt very up to the sort of state of the art at the time. Kind of like it was really state of the nation kind of kind of cinema. Like this was Britain as it was in that at that time. Yeah, definitely worth watching. Red Road. About CCTV.
Did you want to say something, Peter?
Oh, I was just noting that Radiant City has 93% certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So that also sounds good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I was also just kind of like pondering about the fact that, like, we've gone through so many different iterations of what surveillance is. And it starts with the idea of like video cameras, right? Or maybe like the Stasi, and then video cameras, like so spying on citizens to cameras spying on ourselves. Now we're at this weird kind of meta point in the world where the act of watching a movie itself is kind of giving your data your away, and you're kind of being spied upon just by acting, or just by watching a film, because so much like data is collected about us that it doesn't even take a camera to spy on us anymore. We're literally throwing away our privacy to companies and whoever that data ends up in the hands of. That to me is kind of interesting, where the idea of being scared of a camera watching you as you walk down the street just seems kind of like novel, you know? And in my mind, it's almost like the least sinister type of surveillance that exists.
I could see how it would be. It would just feel so much more viscerally terrible, just for basic psych reasons, I guess. People looking at your face, your body,
Maybe this is just me, like being like growing up with the idea that cameras exist on street corners and in shops, but I feel weirdly kind of comforted by that, because I know that I'm not going to do anything bad in the presence of a camera. And if something happens that's bad to me, they're going to catch the bad guy because they're on camera, right? Whereas like online, it's like we're just naked and exposing ourselves nonstop to whoever. It's not, I'm not going to walk down the street naked, but as you sit online, we're revealing so much about ourselves that, it'd be just like a very harmless thing. If you go on Facebook and you look up you can look up your what Facebook thinks is your political viewpoint. And it's like, right, like it nailed me. And I like barely ever go on Facebook, but it knows exactly what my political views are. And that's creepy. Like if you walk down the street, a TV camera isn't going to be able to know, who you vote for, or like Facebook does. Stuff like that is just like very, very interesting and sinister.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have another thought on that, but I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts to jump in on.
I just want to sort of raise what might be an urban legend. I don't know, but I hear this from a lot of people, where they say, sort of talking about targeted adverts, where they say, well, I was talking on the phone the other day about, I don't know, Thailand, right? Just not even about holiday there, just talking about Thailand. And then, the next day, up pops advert for holidays to Thailand, flights for Thailand, right? Flights to Thailand. Now I'm not sure if this is really happening. If the surveillance is so all encompassing, that this is all kind of connected together, surveillance and targeted advertising and so on. But I've heard that from people. Yeah.
I was just listening to the Yuval Noah Harari was on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that right now social media platforms can know if you're homosexual before you know yourselves. So he said that he didn't know that he was gay until he was like 15, and he's like guaranteed people's Facebook accounts know well before then, today's day and age. And that's all well and good, like in America or something. But in a country where it's like super homophobic and they might kill people who are gay, like imagine the government finds out that you're gay before you do, and then they come after you knocking on your door to throw you in jail or put you in some sort of a deconversion camp, or before you even know that you yourself are gay. Like that, apparently, according to Yuval Noah Harari, is a real scenario that we're on the brink of that starting to happen. That to me is pretty dystopian. Also, it could be a great movie.
It could be.
Yeah.
It's very Kafka-esque, I think. It's very reminiscent of the trial.
Yeah. I can imagine some glossy Chinese film or Iranian film, maybe more Chinese than Iranian, about a kind of sexual orientation minority report, where they know you're gay before you do, and they
Right.
it's kind of edge of your seat thriller that no one in the West would possibly be on board with. It just doesn't seem dramatic.
Right.
Why try to stop that? What's your problem?